Hello, I'm James Macquarie, one of the founders at GLAD. This is our Breaking Down Climate Pollution podcast, in which we ask AI to generate a deep dive conversation based on a climate science or policy document we'd like to learn more about. In this episode, we asked the AI to take a deep dive into a working paper published by the Oxford Sustainability Finance Group entitled Investing in Carbon Removal, Levers for the Private Sector. The episode assesses whether the private sector is ready to become the hero we need in the effort to fix climate change. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
This time you want to know if the private sector can really tackle this whole carbon removal thing.
And judging by this report from the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group,
It's a question on a lot of people's minds.
it is a big one.
So can they actually do it? Can the private sector scale up carbon removal to the levels we need?
Well, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
And the latest IPCC report, I think, really drives home the point that carbon removal,
It's not optional anymore.
it's not just about
It's mandatory.
reducing what we're putting out there now. It's cleaning up the mess we've already made.
Exactly, and the problem is that the planet's natural kind of cleaning crew, right? The oceans, the forests,
They're just not keeping up.
right?
They're absorbing some carbon dioxide, but not nearly enough to offset what we're putting into the atmosphere.
So we need to give our planet a bit of an assist here.
We do.
But how much are we talking about? Give me the numbers here.
So the IPCC estimates by 2100 we'll need to remove somewhere between 20 and 660 gigatons of CO2.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a big range.
It is.
I know, and it depends on a lot of factors like future emissions and how natural systems adapt.
But let's just let that upper limit sink in for a second. 660 gigatons.
That's a ridiculously large number.
It's what we're up against.
And I can already see where this is going. 2100, that's like what our grandkids' problem to deal with.
Right. Well, there's the catch.
It's tempting to think that way.
But to actually reach those 2100 targets, we need to be removing way more CO2.
Okay.
And much faster than we are today.
Like how much faster?
Think 30 times more by 2030.
30 times. Okay, now that got my attention.
Yeah, and it gets even more intense.
By 2050, we need to be removing 1,300 times more CO2 than we are today.
Okay, so this is clearly not a wait-and-see situation.
No, it's not.
We need to take action, and we need to take it now.
And that's why all eyes are on the private sector, because the scale of investment
Needed for this is enormous.
So it's going to take everyone with any kind of financial leverage to really make a dent.
Exactly.
All right, so we've laid out the challenge. It's massive time is not on our side.
And everyone's looking to the private sector for answers.
But how do we even begin to make this happen? What are some of the pathways to making this happen?
Well,
So it's not just about companies throwing money at the problem and calling it a day.
right. It's not as simple as just buying offsets.
This report actually lays out a whole plan, 12 different things the private sector can do
12 levers, they call them.
to really move the needle on carbon removal.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they group them.
Because some are about upping the supply of carbon removal,
Yeah.
actually getting more projects up and running, capturing more CO2.
Right, like the actual doing it part.
Exactly. And then others are about making sure there's demand, because even if you're saving the planet,
It has to make financial sense, right?
okay, that makes sense. So let's start with that supply side.
What are some ways the private sector can, really boost the amount of carbon removal happening?
Well, one thing we're already seeing is big companies straight up acquiring existing carbon removal businesses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like ExxonMobil, they just bought a company called Denbury.
Which does carbon capture, and this is a big deal.
It is kind of wild when you think about it.
Because this is ExxonMobil we're talking about.
Right, like the oil and gas giant.
Exactly. So for them to be making moves like this,
It shows how seriously they're taking this whole carbon removal market.
it's not just greenwashing anymore.
No, they're not just dipping a toe in the water, they're diving in head first.
So it's like suddenly everyone wants to be in the carbon removal business.
Yeah, and it's going beyond just these acquisitions, too.
We're seeing companies directly investing in carbon removal businesses
Okay, how so?
through stocks and bonds. So instead of your typical investment portfolio,
You might have holdings in reforestation efforts or direct air capture tech.
so your money could literally be like growing trees
You got it.
or building those giant CO2 vacuums we see in the news.
Exactly. And some investments are even more specific. Like there was recently this Amazonian afforestation bond.
What's that?
So these bonds, they directly fund tree planting initiatives in the Amazon.
So you're not just investing, you're contributing to like a specific project.
Yeah. You can actually see where your money is going.
That's pretty cool. I like that you can actually visualize the impact.
But I'm guessing there are ways for companies to go beyond just investing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, can they be more actively involved in developing these solutions themselves?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of what they call internal innovation.
Okay.
Companies creating their own carbon-removing products or using their own land and resources.
So it's not just writing a check, it's rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty.
Exactly. It's recognizing that they have a role to play in the solution.
That's a whole other level of commitment, for sure.
But like we said, supply is only half the equation.
Right. You could have all the carbon removal projects in the world.
But if nobody's buying what you're selling...
Exactly. You need the demand.
So how do we create that demand then? How do we make it so companies are lining up to buy these carbon removal services?
Well, one way is regulation.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Imagine a future where using carbon removal isn't optional.
It's how companies meet their legal obligations for emissions.
So it's like you either clean up your act...
Or you pay someone else to clean it up for you.
Exactly. And as these carbon emissions regulations evolve...
That or could easily become an and.
Creating this huge demand for carbon removal solutions.
Exactly. And we're already seeing governments kind of build this into their plans.
Like with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the goal is to set up this global carbon market.
So in that scenario, carbon removal becomes less about good PR.
And more about meeting those legal requirements.
Exactly. It becomes a necessity, not a choice.
And alongside those regulations, are there companies that are kind of taking the lead?
Being proactive and driving that demand themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Microsoft, for example.
What are they doing?
They're basically saying, we're willing to pay a premium for high-quality carbon removal now.
Oh, wow. So they're putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And they're doing it in a way that really incentivizes companies to develop these technologies.
How so?
They're guaranteeing that there will be a buyer.
So it's like they're sending a signal, if you build it, we will come.
Exactly. And they're doing this through things like reverse auctions.
Where they basically say, we'll buy X amount of carbon removal.
And then companies bid on who can provide it.
So they're creating that market themselves.
Exactly. And then there are these things called advanced market commitments.
Which are?
Kind of like a group of companies pooling their resources.
To buy carbon removal in advance.
Oh, so it's like pre-ordering.
Exactly. It guarantees demand for solutions that are still in development.
Like a Kickstarter for saving the planet.
I love that analogy.
And of course, we can't forget about those voluntary carbon markets.
Right.
They're still so important as testing grounds for new ideas.
And a way for anyone to get involved right now.
So you have this interesting mix of government regulation, corporate action, individual participation.
All coming together.
It's a multi-pronged approach.
Okay. I can't lie, this is giving me a little bit of hope.
It feels like there are actual mechanisms in place.
To make carbon removal a thriving market.
There is definitely momentum building.
But we also have to acknowledge that there are still challenges.
Of course, this is uncharted territory in a lot of ways.
And with any new market, there are bound to be some growing pains.
Totally. So what are some of the hurdles we need to watch out for? What are the things that could trip up this carbon removal revolution? Yeah, for sure. There are always challenges. So what are some of those things we need to keep in mind?
Well, one of the biggest ones is quality control.
What do you mean?
It's like, how do we really know that a carbon removal project is actually doing what it says it is?
Right. Like, is that forest actually going to survive and keep storing carbon for decades?
Exactly. Or will it go up in flames next wildfire season?
Or, you build this fancy new carbon capture machine. How do you know it's actually capturing the amount of CO2 it claims to be capturing?
Exactly. And that it's not leaking back out,
Right. So it's about verification, but also that long-term thinking, right?
Absolutely. We're playing the long game here.
It's not just a quick fix.
It can't be a Band-Aid solution.
Yeah.
This needs to be for real.
So how do we bring some order to this whole thing? Because it kind of sounds like we're just relying on everyone, to be honest.
Well, it has been a bit of a Wild West situation, I'll admit.
Yeah.
But the good news is that we're starting to see some standardization.
Oh, okay, good. So like a set of rules everyone can agree on.
Exactly, like a seal of approval for carbon removal projects.
I like that.
So investors can say, okay, this project meets the criteria. I feel good about putting my money here.
Yeah, give me an example. What does that look like in practice?
So there's something called the core carbon principles, the CCPs.
Okay.
And they cover everything from how you measure the carbon removed.
To making sure that removal is actually permanent.
So it's about creating that universal standard.
Exactly. And it's not just about the projects themselves.
It's also about being transparent about what companies are actually buying.
Oh, interesting.
So there's this thing called the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative.
Catchy name.
Right. They've come up with this claims code of practice.
Okay.
So companies can't just make vague promises anymore.
They have to show their work prove that the carbon removals they're buying are legit.
I like it. Accountability is key.
It definitely keeps everyone honest.
Okay, so it seems like we're moving in the right direction, even if it's still a work in progress. But are there any other big ideas out there? Anything that could really supercharge carbon removal investment?
Well, one really interesting thing to think about is how all these different carbon markets could potentially work together.
What do you mean? Like right now you have those international agreements.
Yeah, like Article 6 of the Paris Agreement.
And then individual countries have their own emissions trading schemes.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, you have the whole voluntary carbon market.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to keep track of, for sure.
But imagine if all of these systems were connected.
So instead of a bunch of separate markets, you have one giant global marketplace for carbon removal.
Exactly.
Okay, and what would that change?
Well, it would make it much easier and cheaper to invest in carbon removal.
How so?
Because you have this huge pool of buyers and sellers all in the same system.
So more competition, more innovation, potentially driving down prices.
Exactly. It could be huge.
Okay, so that's on a more macro level.
Yeah.
But are there any other promising developments on the actual financial side of things?
Yeah, there are some really cool new financial tools popping up like PROSITs.
PROSITs. What are those?
Think of them like diversified investment portfolios, but specifically designed for carbon removal.
So you spread your investment across different projects,
Yeah.
minimize your risk.
Exactly.
That's clever.
And there's even insurance for carbon removal now.
Wait, really? You can get insurance for a carbon removal project.
Apparently so.
What will they think of next?
Right. But it makes sense. It protects those investments.
It makes them more appealing.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here
You
today.
really have.
We've gone from the urgent need for carbon removal to all these different ways the private sector can step up.
From planting trees to building those CO2 vacuums.
And we've talked about the challenges, the potential pitfalls, the incredible innovations.
It's a rapidly changing landscape.
It really is. But I think the question on everyone's mind is, what does this all mean for me? Why should I care about any of this?
It's a fair question, and I think the answer is this is bigger than just the environment.
Okay, go on.
This is about understanding where the world is heading and the massive economic shift that's coming.
The transition to a low-carbon economy.
Exactly. And like any big transition, there will be winners and losers.
So you're saying that understanding this stuff, carbon removal, the technology, the investment side of things,
That knowledge is power.
it's about making informed decisions, whether you're an investor or just someone who wants to be a more informed citizen.
Exactly.
It's about being prepared for the future.
And potentially even shaping that future.
I like that. So today's deep dive was all about giving you, the listener, the information you need to do just that.
To be a part of the solution.
We've given you a lot to think about today, but as always, I want to leave you with a question, something to ponder.
We've seen how much potential there is in the private sector.
The innovation, the investment, the drive to make carbon removal a reality.
But given the sheer scale of what we're talking about, could they ever do it alone? Could the private sector ever really move the needle without governments stepping in, making big policy changes? It's a question worth considering.
It is a big one.
That's all the time we have for today, but the conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep asking questions.
And keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.